We're live. Hey, uh, this is the old captain here, and this is Asshole Consulting. I apologize for a slightly different format, but I wanted to get a special guest celebrity consultant in on this. Chris Bechtloff, aka the Bechtloff. How are you doing, Chris?
Doing pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
Good. I'm kind of at a loss for answering this question because I certainly have my opinions, but this is a young man who is kind of frustrated at his church. And since I haven't seen the inside of a church since the last time movie Bob has seen a vagina, I think that it would probably be best to outsource this to you. But let me just go ahead and read it for our listeners and for our client. Hey again, I had just messaged you a question and another one I've been stewing on popped up, so I figured I would pay you for a second video. A few years ago, I had become disillusioned with the direction of our country has been going, so I started networking and aligning myself with conservative Christian social circles in my city. I figured this would be a good way to build a community of like-minded people who love Western values. I had attended GOP events and many traditional churches. I had noticed that the people in the groups were almost entirely upper middle class, Whipple, and baby boomers. It would logically make sense that this demographic would be the single most conservative, pro-Western values, pro-freedom market group left in the United States. They seemed slightly unhappy with the Obama presidency and a little uncomfortable with the sexual decadence pervading our culture. However, anytime I brought up the topic of Western decline, they seemed to be completely clueless as to what I was talking about, if not outright denying any decline at all. If I pushed the conversation any further, they would eventually imply that the only real problem in our country is blue-collar white men like myself who have a bad attitude. Here are two examples. One, there's an epidemic of church youth growing up to be liberal, sexually confused, and experimenting with promiscuity and homosexuality. A supposedly anti-feminist mother was baffled as to why her college-age daughter had become a bi-curious slut. Using common sense and even official church teaching, I tried explaining to the anti-feminist mother that she raised her daughter to mistrust men, repress her urge for male dominance, and to put her career before marriage. Therefore, she raised her daughter to be a feminist, hence her sexual dysfunction. The mother hypocritically agreed with the church doctrine, then refused to connect the dots, and then decided that the only real problem is my attitudes towards women. The poor guy, she comes up asking him for opinions, then blames it on him when this guy's probably never met his daughter or her daughter. Is she really this stupid, or is she in denial? Two, at a men's conference, I was discussing how I prefer to live minimally and ride my motorcycle rather than take on liabilities due to the poor economy. For some reason, this really pissed them off. They told me that real men should never have free time to do things like motorcycling, and that I should invest my disposable money and time into flipping real estate, getting a Roth IRA, and a CD. Because CDs just pay so well nowadays. I explained that the economy is artificially inflated and that there was no actual recovery. The cherished forms of invested. He probably meant investing. Their cherished forms of investing are therefore liabilities and not assets. They explained that the economy is just fine and that it will only get better and better in years to come. This doesn't add up. On one hand, these guys are anti-Obama and pro-free market, yet on the other hand, they spend the money and invest it if they were taking advice from Paul Krugman. Something is off with these people, although they profess to be stalwarts of conservative values on paper. In reality, they're eerily similar to white liberal elites in everything ranging from their lifestyles to their finances to their personalities. They seem to have seething contempt for blue-collar white guys like myself while simultaneously giving degenerate liberals a free pass. How are these smart, successful people that clueless to the obvious? Or are they in denial that the country they love has fallen so low? Or are they even really conservatives? If not, then why do they pretend to be? Why do they hate the working class? What am I missing here? So if you could just answer that in a sentence or less, I'd really that's all we really need.
Simple question. No, we're gonna need about 20 minutes here at least. This actually reminds me, the way I discovered you, Aaron, of all things, was somebody had brought to your attention a comment stream I had on a site called Breakpoint, and you posted it. And basically the article was on, isn't it a shame that that young people aren't marrying, and it's these men's fault and they don't want to man up and marry them sluts. Not those exact words, and I brought up the point in the comments, to which I was called all kinds of things and misogynist and stuff, that, aside from religious obligation, men don't have much of a reason to marry right now, because you're essentially putting your manhood and your wallet in a blender and hoping the other person doesn't push the button, because that's just the way the courts are structured right now. That's just the way the family courts are structured. And I was called out every name in the book for daring to think this, right? And so this really reminded me of that.
Okay, but so what I'm getting from it, though, because this is why I called you in, because you're there, you go to church, and I see it, either indirectly through the Manosphere, Return of Kings, or Dalrock. It seems to be that a very high percentage of the Christian community is delusional about the plight of not just your average man, but your average young person today. And this guy's trying to go in there and say, hey, here are the problems we face. And it seems we could say the elders, although they're not, these don't sound like to be actual members of the church, but the older, presumably wiser members of the church in the Christian community, which you would think are kind of the infrastructure and the foundation by which the church to actually lead the younger people out, would be a little bit more in tune with the real world economics of it. But apparently this isn't the case. So, I mean, is that something that you're seeing over on your end?
Well, yeah. And the example the guy gave of the daughter that had gone off to college and ended up becoming bisexual. I mean, first of all, real talk for a moment, all women are bisexual. It's just a matter of how much alcohol needs to be involved. But the fact that she was experimenting and decided to, be licking up on her roommate or whatever was going on there. Well, there's a couple things involved. First of all, I don't know exactly, but my guess is she got sent off to a secular university for some liberal arts worthless degree. And she was fed all kinds of unimaginable nonsense in the college. So there's that. But also, she probably shouldn't have been going to college in the first place. I mean, most people shouldn't be going to college. Even if the colleges weren't liberal hellholes, most people shouldn't be going, because they're meant for the top percentage of people. They're meant to be where the leaders are trained. Not everyone's supposed to spend a quarter of their life in school. It sounds almost Stone Age this day and age, but a woman in her early 20s should be finding a husband and possibly pumping out a few pups. Instead, she's off getting some liberal arts degree, and she's, getting drunk and having happy fun time with her roommate or whatever the hell's going on there. And the reason you can't talk a lot of these people out of sending their kids to college is half the problem here, and that's they're traditionalists. And they're not traditionalists in the alt-right manosphere or neo-reactionary, whatever the hell you want to call it, sense that we've really looked down and we've come to the conclusion that maybe the old ways are the best. They're traditionalists in the sense that they don't necessarily question it. They go with whatever, they're liberals from 10 years ago in a sense. And they, by nature, just have a hard time accepting changing norms. They have a hard time accepting changing dynamics. They have a hard time accepting that college is worthless now. They can't accept that because it's not the world they grew up in. It's not what they were taught. And likewise, they can't accept that things are really, really bad because, well, they just can't. They just can't face it. A lot of them. They just lack the stones, as it were. So that's half the problem. Half the problem is just something that's inherent to, I want to say, conservatives, traditionalists, or whatever. It's the reason the left is run roughshod off is the left doesn't play by the rules, and conservatives. I keep hearing all these conservatives who say, like, how has Hillary Clinton not been indicted? I don't understand. Well, it's because no one's there to indict her. There's no one. You know what I mean? The rules don't magically enforce themselves. And that's something I think in their heart of hearts, a lot of these conservatives don't get. They believe too much in the system. The other thing, and this is with the church, and this is another major thing, the church has become incredibly feminized. You'll hear sermon after sermon against pornography habits, which is, no, you shouldn't be doing that. Yeah, I'm not defending it, but you'll never hear, or you're not as likely, I should say, to hear sermons against gossip. You'll see Christians far more likely to attack homosexuals because this is destroying the family. And again, I'm not condoning homosexuality, more so than you'll see them attack single moms. They won't ever touch that third rail. And the church, the modern church in Dollar Rock points this out a lot. It's very quick to condemn men and not so much women. And part of the reason I think that's happened is, I mean, you have your churches, and then you have sort of these para-church ministries, which are really just media empires, the majority of them. Your James Dobson's is a keen example of this, Focus on the Family and all this. I mean, what was James Dobson's bread and butter when he was at Focus on the Family? Yes, he did a lot of political stuff there, but primarily he was giving quote-unquote family advice. Essentially, he was the churchianity version of Oprah. And who was his audience? Primarily female, primarily, young mothers, primarily. So basically, the quote-unquote consumers of a lot of church media ended up becoming mostly female. And that really, really drove the direction of the overall church in America to a very feminine direction. So that's part of what you're seeing. What you're seeing, as best as I've been, and these are the exact same things I've been seeing that I was like, what the hell is up with these people? You're seeing a lot of people that just can't, to use the overused term, red pill themselves on some of the realities of the world around them. And even some of the realities of Scripture, and you see an overall feminized direction of the church.
So would it basically, okay, you look at any religion that's legitimate, or one of the main ones, their scriptures or their books or whatever, it teaches you wisdom. Among many other things, wisdom is there, how to live your life, do this, don't do that. It's a book of wisdom. And here are some rules, and here's some commandments, by the way, as well. And here's some really good reasons to follow these things. But what I'm seeing, or what you're saying, or this is just one finger on the pulse, is the church is no longer teaching these passing on this real world realism, because it might bring up some uncomforting questions or uncomfortable questions about, no, you don't go to college. In other words, it's secularism that's teaching Christians and not how to live in the real world. And then church is just kind of like, yeah, this thing we go to on Sundays to feel spiritual. We don't really listen to whatever wisdom might be in there. And the pastors, to keep the butts in the pews, they're not going to get too politically incorrect or tackle any kind of real world problems that might actually help some people out. So they stick to, general, the afterlife or whatever, kind of more New Testament and less Old Testament. And then if it actually comes to picking a side, when all of a sudden there is a problem or a crisis, and also you do have a ton of single moms, then they'll go with the PC route if they're forced to do anything because they're afraid of the job. Pretty much kind of like anybody else.
Yes, you hit a lot of points there. They will almost always attack men. You'll notice that the sexual morals of that evangelical culture promotes, it's always the men's fault, even when it's very clearly not. And what they don't understand is, any student of history will tell you, the sexual morals of a culture almost always are determined by the women in that culture. Men live up to the standard women expect. If women end up fucking the bad boy all the time, then that's what men are going to want to be, except for the handful of dumb simps that don't catch the message. Women are, this is just basic biology here. Women are the gatekeepers, women decide the next generation. And that's a tremendous power, and it's not one women are ever held to account for. Women are, they're given no agency, ironically enough, and yet, free reign in evangelical culture. In other words, they can do whatever the hell they want, but they're never responsible for it.
Well, then I don't see any religious power figures coming down saying, "Hey, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that." And if there's no power, there'll be a power vacuum, and there's nothing but secularism or an alternative religion to come in and start dictating to both men and women to what to do. So it's kind of surprising to me that you have these milky toast, spineless pastors or elders in the community, and like, oh, whatever, dear, oh, okay. And now, especially if you can see them, okay, yeah, divorce is fine. all right, let's baptize animals in the church, and oh yeah, we're going to have gays and we're going to have women pastor, which, technically, me not being religious, I'm not against. But without leadership, there's going to be a vacuum, and they're going to find it from the secular world. So this is why probably you have people in the church who presumably, on the face of it, you would assume are more traditional, conservative, etc., but then still are functionally and behaviorally no different than those in the secular world.
Well, once you get to the point of things like, a female pastor or something like that, I mean, that's a dead branch.
Right.
It's already dead by the time it gets to that point. But again, the problem isn't so much the female pastors, because again, that's just a rotting dead branch. The problem is the feminized pastors. You look at some of the quote unquote leaders of evangelical culture. I mean, you look at like a guy like John Stonestreet or something, and you can just see in his face that this is not a man that's ever worked a day in his life. You see this with their reaction to Donald Trump. It's church ladies that are clutching their pearls. I know he's a Mormon, but he's actually kind of a good example. Glenn Beck is a good example of the kind of man that runs evangelical culture right now. Just a beady-eyed, effeminate little weasel. And that's what you have right now. And I mean, I don't necessarily have a solution for this guy, other than, I mean, you're not crazy, buddy. I see the same problems, and I think a lot of other people do. Some things that prevent the problems from getting fixed is, as I said, you have, conservatives by their nature don't want to change things, unless they get really, really bad. And things are feminized just for the way, the evangelical media cult complex, whatever you want to call it, is structured. The audience it's going to primarily cater to. My advice on these churches is, and I don't know where exactly this guy's at, so it could vary. I mean, I'm blessed to be in a rather conservative, God-fearing K-type rural area, but go small. Go to the small ones a lot of times. That's the ones where the real action is at. And when you're in a church, I mean, look, no church is perfect. If it was, you wouldn't be fit to be there. But when you're in a church, get involved in a small group. Get involved with, find the men in that church and get involved with them. And to some extent, you're going to have to just ignore the other silliness. You're going to have to, I mean, I know of a church in my area, and I'm not going to name it, that, basically they have a little effeminate weasel running it. And there's a lot of good people there who just don't want to move because they feel like they're ceding ground. And this church manages to be pretty decent, completely despite its leadership. They all but basically ignore him. And, get in their small groups and do their own thing and have real Bible study. And to some extent, that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to find some real Christian men in the church. And I mean, go find a guy that's worked construction. Go find a guy that's been in the military. Go find a
Vietnam vet or something.
Yeah, go find a guy who's been around men, who's worked a few days in his life. That's the kind of guy you want. That's, frankly, that's the kind of guy that should be pastors of these churches, and more often is, which is actually another problem evangelical culture has, and it's a similar problem in the secular world, and that's too much credentialism. The idea that somebody needs to be spending 4 to 8 years in seminary to become a pastor is ridiculous.
The pay ain't that good either.
The pay is not, unless you're crooked, unless you're Joel Osteen about it, the pay isn't good.
Whoa, what? There's something wrong with Joel? You mean Joel ain't on the up and up?
Yeah, Joel's not on the up and up.
Oh man,
it staggers me. There's people that can't see that. I mean, he just looks like a devil.
If you're good looking and young, there you go. Just become a pastor. That's.
But yeah, I mean, the way churches ought, if you ask me, and no one did, the way churches ought to structure themselves, that they ought to do a lot of mentorship and shadowing, where somebody who grows up in the church shadows the pastor, becomes a new pastor, that sort of thing. Seminary is all but worthless these days. Again, you don't need to be spending 20 damn years, 25 years, 30 years of your life in school. That's not what we were meant to be. The rate we're going to be in school till we're 50, and we're going to learn nothing.
So then what percent, I mean, what kind of percentages is this kid facing? Like, and I know there's no way to tell, but, you've sampled churches. What percentage of the churches would you say are legitimate? Like they have a classical traditional teaching, like they got a Pastor Tom over there. They will take the hard lessons and teach them to the congregation as well as the easy ones. They won't just teach forgiveness, but they'll teach fire and brimstone, and they're unassuaged or uninfluenced by, well, oh, the Lord has a plan, the Lord will provide. Let's just say, oh, we'll forgive, and no punishment. I mean, what percentage of them are out there that this guy? What's his odds of finding something like this?
Well, first, I'm going to give the guy a piece of advice out here. Next time one of these Christians for example, you know of a couple in a church that's having another kid they can't afford, and they say, well, the Lord will provide, when they purposely sought out to have a kid that they couldn't afford the ones they had. You hit them with the verse in, I think it's Matthew, where Christ is tempted by the devil. And at one point, the devil takes him up to the highest building and says, throw yourself off and the angels will take care of you. And Christ says, no, I'm not going to do that, because God's not your genie. You don't purposely put yourself in a bad position because God will bail you out. He might. Lord knows he's bailed my dumb ass out on numerous occasions.
I remember you had that pregnancy scare. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
But you don't count on that, okay? You don't count on that. If he takes pity on you, dumbass, be thankful, but you don't count on that. He's not your genie. So that's what you hit those people. The Lord will provide. It doesn't matter that I purposely fuck shit up. The other thing, as for percentage, it's hard to say. I mean, you got to do your homework on churches. I will say that when it comes to Protestantism, you steer clear of almost all the big denominations except for Baptists. Baptists are the only ones that have any balls. All the other big denominations, those are dead branches.
Like what are we? I don't know. I don't know. Is that like Lutheranism, Catholicism? Is that Protestant? Or I don't know.
No, Catholicism isn't. But yeah, like Luther, the big branches, the big denominations, they're
Methodist.
the ones that. Yeah, Methodists, for example, they're the ones that half the time they got a tranny pastor or something like that.
Okay.
You ignore those. Those are dead branches, and there's a reason no one goes to those. So you want to stick to either Baptist, Orthodox, if there's any Orthodox in your area, they're something to look into. I have some theological issues with them, but they're good. They're good God-fearing people.
They're intellectually honest.
Yeah.
Okay.
And stick to some of these. And it sounds like you're in some of them, but like the kind of non-denominational, generic evangelical churches, a lot of them you'll get they'll be too cucked. But then a lot of them, the worst thing that you can say about them is they're a little too try hard. They're a little too, we're trying to be hip kind of shit. Yeah. But sometimes in a harmless way. You know what I mean? So look into non-denominational, evangelical churches. Look into Baptist churches. Look into Orthodox would be my advice. Those are where you're going to find. That's going to be your best bet of finding the good God-fearing people. And again, you got to also keep in mind that no church is going to be perfect. I mean, you're going to be the culture is so marinated, and you're going to be dealing with this almost everywhere you go, to some extent. You have to just determine what is an acceptable extent.
See, it's getting. I'm onto an idea, Chris. I know with this podcast pastor thing, I'm onto an idea. I just need a pastor, because if it's this hard for people to find a church, I'll just set up one digitally. I just need a pastor. That's all I need. We'll just have fire and brimstone. That's all we'll be. But until that time, he's going to have to go. He'll have to go and find one. But we're working on it. Let's put it that way.
But yeah, you're gonna look, and it's a problem with conservatism. It's where we get the term conservative and all this other stuff. It's not just a problem with quote unquote Christianity right now. It's a problem with conservatism, and it's that they don't want to face the real problems, and they don't want to look at hard solutions. And
that kind of parlays into the second question he had. I'm an economist, and I'm dumbfounded when people can't look up the national debt, and they think like the stuff that he was telling us, that they think the economy is going to be just fine. You invest in a 401k, blah. Now I've looked at the numbers, and I'm kind of like, my jaw drops. But not being, I can't. It really seems as especially the males, when he tries to go and find the males, that they really are that clueless. They're still about, oh, don't go out and have fun, don't ride your motorcycle, almost kind of, man up and marry these sluts. That kind of, like, you have an obligation to be as miserable as us, or to just have your head stuck in the ground.
Well, part of that is, whether those men admit it or not, jealousy. They don't, the man's still in chains. He hates the free man.
He's because this kid's obviously free, unattached, has no children or no wife.
I mean, look, yes, there's a kernel of wisdom. Look, you are best off in life going finding yourself a good woman, and pumping out some kids, and having a family. That's biologically, spiritually, that's what you're best at. That's where 90% at least of human beings would be at their most happiest. The problem is that isn't always available. So
you just get to deal with the world you got. I mean, here's your hand. Now, there may not be church. I mean, heck, how many instances in the Bible was there someone in a foreign land and there was no church, or you're overseas and there is no church? Or so, I mean, I guess I understand that lesson. I'm more fascinated by the sociological evolution, because when I was in church, fire, brimstone, waspy, Republican, and now I would have thought there would have been at least somewhat of a conservative leaning, and this kind of seems like a really Sunday brunch driver kind of maybe. You think, well, the Lord will provide, kind of almost indifference about it.
Even fire and brimstone, but you'll notice that there's this stark case of legalism that he's describing here. There's a stark case of they somehow managed to lose the fire and brimstone and also lose any kind of grace and freedom that Christianity offers. These men don't look at this other guy and look at him as a brother and say, well, you would probably be happier getting a wife and kids, but if that's not where God's leading you, that's not where God's leading you. You're not in debt. You should be happy about that. They don't look at it like that. They're like, you got to follow the rules and color inside the lines. Why? Well, because you just gotta. That's being a Pharisee. That's coming up with new rules that aren't even in the Bible. Nothing in the Bible says you got to go get a 401k. All right. In fact, the Bible's probably much kinder on the minimalist guy. Don't buy things because you think you're supposed to. Don't get even a family because you think you're supposed to. Get one because you want one.
Unfortunately, nothing about motorcycles back in those. I bet you if Paul was around today, he'd be pro motorcycle. He would ride to the Corinthians and say, hey, check this out. By the way,
and also never trust a church where the men in it, that's particularly leadership, are anti-gun. Don't ever. Don't.
Oh, that's
ever.
That's just.
Don't die. No, don't. I mean, yeah, don't.
Did you run into that?
Not personally, but I've seen it through other people, where it's not even like pro gun control so much as it's like, I would never have a gun in my house kind of thing. No. Jesus himself said, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one.
Yeah. Well, it's just indication of an ulterior political motive that would even. I mean, one of the last times I went to church, I walked in and all the guy did was the pastor bitch and whine about how the rich were rich and the poor were poor and this and that. And I'm like, excuse me, I came here for church. I didn't come here for a political. And then that's when I'm like, yeah, there might be some rot in the old church here. But all right, well, anything else you wanted to give this guy a bit of advice? I mean, keep hunting, keep searching,
keep searching. Maybe even maybe even get together with some guys who are feeling. I bet you if you looked around in your average church, you'd see a lot of other guys that are feeling similar. And I mean, don't be afraid to start a church if you think that's an option. I mean, even if you just start a Bible study once a week in your house with some Christian friends. I mean, you don't have to go to a church. It says don't forsake the fellowship of believers. Don't be legalistic about it. It doesn't necessarily mean you need absolutely to get up every Sunday morning and go to a church, particularly when it's dead or half dead. It means, have fellowship with believers. So if all the churches in your area are not worth your time, not worth getting up on a Sunday morning, then gather up some Christian friends that are solid Christians and have a weekly Bible study and let that be your church for a while too. God leads you to something better.
And this could just be, religious or not, this could just be a trial in life that's going to make you stronger. This could be something that maybe you have to go without the church for a while. Maybe this is going and searching, kind of finding a wife or kind of finding a good car. The search will make you appreciate when you find a good one. So you don't take it for granted down the road. You say, wow, I found a deal here. Holy cow. And that way you'll know it when you find it.
Yeah. Having just two solid Christian friends in your life is worth more than half the churches in existence. So at the very least, make sure you got some good Christian friends in your life.
Yeah,
and make sure you have the fellowship.
And if he does, and I'm not bringing it up because you're on here, but you host a podcast that, although it's video games and cursing and swearing and locker room talk, you guys, I'd say a good third or at least a quarter of it is religious and talking about religion. So even if it is on the internet, and I'm sure there's plenty of sermons that you can find, but if you're just looking for a bunch of young guys, some traditionalists, some new, like Davis Arini, he's recently new. You could tune into your podcast, and it might be a little too locker roomy talky, but it's definitely you do talk about at least you talk about modern day Christianity and as it fits into the real world, not merely regurgitating and singing hymns and then a 15-minute stint about whatever, and then on your way you go to watch your daughter become a lesbian or with her liberal arts degree.
Well, yeah, I was not raised in the church, so I have quite the mouth on me. I was raised by a Navy man, so while I try not to take the Lord's name in vain, the rest of it, I actually view a lot of swearing as a manners thing, a time and place thing, and my live stream is locker room talk. That's what it's meant to be. So
I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think there's more important stuff than.
Well, I'm sure if he's listening to you, Aaron, that he's not too offended by.
No, I mean,
he just bought a service called Asshole Consulting, so he can't.
That is true. Yes, that is.
He can't be that offended by naughty words.
Yeah, I'm sure he doesn't have virgin ears. So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen. Thanks much, Chris. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks for having me.
We'll tune you in on Saturday night. All right.
I hope so. Thank you.
All right. We'll see you later.